This is Fresh Tracks Weekly. This week, Randy and I are discussing why states are legally able to discriminate against non-resident hunters, the history of how we ended up there, and the potential for it to be challenged in the future. But we do also have some news stories from the week. There was a recent amendment in the budget reconciliation package put forth by Republicans Mark Amodei of Nevada and Celeste Maloy of Utah to sell off at least 11,000 acres of BLM and Forest Service land in the states of Nevada and Utah, although some are claiming that it could be upwards of 500,000 acres of land that could be affected. The amendment was accepted by the House Natural Resources Committee with no option for the public to provide input. We've talked about this in multiple past episodes, how Congress has attempted to try to use the budget reconciliation process to sell public land. By using this method, they are able to avoid the public involvement and avoid filibustering, basically making it easier and sneakier to get certain things they want. If this amendment continues forward, it'll allow for the sale of multiple parcels of land in 6 counties in Nevada and Utah. These sections of land have already been identified as being suitable for disposal, some in the name of housing affordability, with some with no stated purpose. The initial sale of these parcels would be one thing, but many are concerned about the precedent that it might set for selling public lands in general, and then it could open the door for more sales in the future. Montana Representative Ryan Zinke, who is the former Secretary of Interior, said that he would work with leadership to get the amendment stripped from the bill, which is encouraging, but it appears that many members of Congress are supportive of this amendment. If you want to reach out to your representatives and senators and let them know how you feel about this amendment, we will put the phone number to the Capitol switchboard in the description below. The amendment to sell public lands is just one piece of the budget bill that could impact hunters and anglers and public land users. There are also significant cuts to federal agencies that are being proposed. This includes cutting $300 million from the U.S. Forest Service, Forest and Rangeland Research, $198 million from the BLM, $207 million from the U.S. Fish Wildlife Service, which is including a lot of grants that go to on-the-ground habitat and wildlife projects, cuts of $754 million to the Natural Resources and Conservation Service, private land and conservation operations, $564 million to the U.S. Geological Survey, investigations and surveys and research, and then $900 million to national park operations. I think it's important to emphasize how these cuts are felt. Many of these cuts will stop and prevent wildlife and habitat research from happening. Without these studies, we lose our understanding of how we can maintain healthy wildlife populations. It's through science and good management that we've been able to bring back many of these species after nearly wiping them out. And that same use of science has allowed us to maintain these populations and mitigate damage as we develop areas. By cutting research, we are also going to cut our opportunity to hunt. If we don't understand what's happening, we can't expect to know how to maintain wildlife populations. In Colorado, the Attorney General's office recently provided comments on corner crossing within the state and how the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals decision applies there. The main emphasis and encouraging statement is that corner crossing from federal to federal land is legal in Colorado. However, they did note that it is illegal to cross from any state-owned or state-leased land. It is also illegal to cross from private to state, adding that this applies to all state land, which is state land boards, state wildlife areas, state trust land, and state parks. So again, it's now cool to cross from federal to federal as long as no portion of the private property is touched while crossing. I think the moral of the story is to exercise extreme caution if you plan on corner crossing, know the rules of the state and the land that you're trying to do it on, and make sure that you are actually passing over the corner in the right spot and not touching any private land. There's a lot of hype and misinformation going around right now about corner crossing, so just make sure you do your research and know before you start accessing all of these checkerboard lands. In California, the bill that would have allowed hounds to be used to haze black bears died in committee by a single vote. The bill would have allowed houndsmen to haze bears in certain circumstances to help avoid conflicts in these increasing wildlife urban zones. And to be clear, this doesn't have anything to do with hunting whatsoever. It was simply supposed to be an additional non-lethal method to educate bears and mitigate conflict. Interestingly, around 80 sportsmen showed up to testify in support of this bill, and only a handful of people opposed the measure, yet it still failed to move forward by that single vote. That being said, a few hours after the vote, it was put up for reconsideration, which means that it will have a chance to be reheard next year. All right, we're going to jump into our deeper dive. If you're unaware, most states limit hunting significantly to non-residents, both through access to the wildlife and by charging a much higher fee to non-residents. Some states, the difference between fees for residents and non-residents is extreme. But Randy is about to explain exactly how we ended up here and what might happen in the future. I guess the recent news story that brought this to light was in Oklahoma, which I mentioned last week. There was some changes where they're going to charge fees to hunt public land. There are WMAs that they have in the state, and then also federal
wildlife management or
wildlife refuges. Yeah, so national wildlife refuges. So what the implications of that could be just in terms of opening up the door for other states doing the same thing, it makes us curious to see what could happen. But what you brought up is how the reason states can discriminate against non-residents stems back to a court case that went to the Supreme Court, Baldwin case in 1978. Is that when it was?
1978, right here in Montana.
It was Montana versus...
It was Baldwin versus Montana Department of Game and Fish.
Yeah, so it was even before it was called Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
Yeah, and that case, if you go read it, works its way through the courts, and it ends up in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And the attorney who argued it, Jim Getz, is still a practicing attorney here in Bozeman. I've hired him on wildlife things and stuff a few times. And the last time that I hired him on something related to this was 2003, because there's all kinds of stuff going on. And he walked me through all the legal theories of everything. And I'm an accountant, right? I read tax law. I don't understand. I mean, if you tell me constitutional law, I'm slightly familiar with some of it. But he walks through all these things like the Privileges and Immunities Clause, the Dormant Commerce Clause, Equal Protection Clause, the Supremacy Clause. These are all parts of the Constitution that are built in there, whether it's by amendment or reference back to the, all kinds of things, the Federalist Papers. He goes through all this stuff. Anyhow, for what it meant to me was, does hunting reach the point of being a basic fundamental right that's protected under the Constitution, under all these clauses? A lot of these clauses are to make sure that if I live in Montana and I drive to Wyoming, no big deal, right? We can do this. If I want to do commerce from Montana to Texas, there's no interference in this interstate commerce. So there's all these things that we kind of take for granted about why we can do what we do in the United States. And so the summary of the Baldwin case was that states can discriminate in terms of price because, one, hunting is not a constitutional right that is protected under any of these clauses that Baldwin asserted. And it doesn't reach the level of commerce, the Dormant Commerce Clause or all these other things related to the Commerce Clause even apply, because hunting's not commerce. It's wildlife management. Mm-hmm. It's sport. The decision says it's wildlife management, it's sport, and it's getting food.
Yeah. Well, and then the implications of that case, like kind of the 30,000-foot view, was that the states, like at the time, the discrepancy was what, 7-1?
7-1.
Which
non-residents paid 7 times what Montana residents paid.
Right. And then so this hunter and outfitter did not like that they had to pay 7 times the rate, And so that was in 1978. And now in Montana, same example, what is it, 20-1 probably?
Over 30.
30-1?
Yeah.
Okay, so what it would cost to hunt an elk in Montana if you're a non-resident versus a resident, yeah. And it's the same, or not the same, but there's a lot of similarities in other states, and not just price discrepancies, but then also access to wildlife. Obviously, the tag allocations are way less for non-residents.
Has an outfitter law for guides in wilderness areas.
And then Alaska has laws for requiring outfitters for certain species. Yep. So there's a lot of different ways that essentially states discriminate against non-residents.
Look at our neighbors to the east, the Dakotas.
Yeah.
Certain parts of waterfowl season are closed to non-residents in North Dakota. Certain parts of the pheasant season on public land are closed to non-residents for a period of time.
Yeah, and then Blake was telling us, I think was is it Arkansas? There's a duck. I know there's a duck one somewhere back
somewhere
east.
Missouri or Arkansas. Yeah.
kind of famous duck hunting areas where public land you're not allowed to hunt as a non-resident for the opening week or so.
Right.
Yeah, but anyway, there's a lot of...
Yeah. So when the Baldwin case was decided, the Wyoming Law Review, which is out of the University of Wyoming, the next year took the Baldwin case and did a legal review of it and said, okay, the court was pretty specific here and the fact patterns were this. If these states start getting out of hand and if this opens the door to ridiculous discrepancies in prices, we think that the findings of this case could be subject under the Commerce Clause because it's going to make elk hunting look more like commerce than wildlife management. And that prophecy that they issued in 1979 kind of held true because by 2020 or 2002, 2003, 4, and 5, all of a sudden we had cases in the 8th district, circuit, the 10th circuit, and the 9th circuit,
which were essentially people challenging a similar
scenario,
I guess, right?
And saying, you know what, hunting has gotten, and these were mostly outfitters.
Okay,
It was outfitting. United States Outfitters, USO, was the biggest one, and it happened in Arizona in 2005, and they won. And Arizona had to redo their entire draw in 2005.
Dang.
With no non-resident cap. And guess who drew an early rifle elk tag in 2005 for Unit 10 when they redrew?
So you benefited from that one.
Guess who drew the best archery tag in Arizona that year because of the redraw? Corey Jacobson.
Dang. Okay.
So all of a sudden, the state started doing exactly what the Wyoming Law Review said you shouldn't do because you're gonna open yourself up to this Commerce Clause. Well, all of a sudden you have lower circuit courts that are saying, hey, new fact pattern, new set of circumstances, the Baldwin case is going to be superseded. So everyone's seeing this starting to head to the Supreme Court. And in 2006, Harry Reid sponsored the bill along with 16 Western U.S. senators. And I can't remember, they called it a something act, but it's Public Law 109-13. So it was the end of 2005 when they passed this. And it's Section 6036 that said states, when it comes to managing wildlife, are exempt from the dormant Commerce Clause.
Yeah, so basically giving them free rein to discriminate against non-residents, which I have to admit, as a Montana resident, I enjoy the benefits of discriminating against non-residents because I get to go hunting every year for, what is it? We have an 8-week at least season.
Oh yeah, 6 weeks of archery, 5 weeks of rifle, and 10 days of muzzleloader.
So anyway, we get all sorts of hunting privileges and can go deer hunting, elk hunting every single year, and I definitely enjoy it. So part of me definitely is is pretty happy about it.
Yeah.
But then obviously as a non-resident, you're probably not going to be happy about it because it takes you a long time especially if you want a special permit in Montana, then you might never draw one in a lifetime.
Yeah. I wasn't very happy yesterday when I didn't draw an Idaho sheep tag and it cost me this huge non-refundable fee.
Right.
I accept it. I know that going into it. I have to pay this ridiculous fee to Wyoming to apply for bison. And me and a lot of other people non-residents are fighting over 10% of the tags. So in all the other states where I'm a non-resident, it's like, but I understand this is the law.
Yeah.
I can complain it's like complaining about the weather. This is what the courts have said. And as long as this law is in effect and states are exempt from some of these constitutional clauses, this is unfortunately, if you're a non-resident, what we're going to see. Because our Montana legislature just wrapped up. And I used to go up there regularly, or even before the session, get a hold of some of our local legislators and say, hey, the ridiculous low fee I pay as a resident, can we start bumping that up? It's ridiculous. No way. So what did our legislature just do? The base Montana hunting license stayed the same for you and I. But for non-residents, it went from $15 to $100. And so I start seeing what's happening to non-residents. And I'm a non-resident in 49 other states. I have a lot of concerns about it. You get the argument of, well, the damn non-residents influence the legislature on everything related to wildlife policy. Well, yeah, they're paying the freight. You're asking to have someone else pay the freight and the non-resident and complain if they have any say in anything, or their agents via, outfitters, landowners, whoever. Well, you can't have it both ways. For me, the bigger issue I worry about is a lot of conservation, public lands access happens on a national scale. So I go ask the dude from Michigan, hey, can you call your senator? We could use some help on this public land deal. And he's like, well, you guys charge me 30 times as much, and in some states I get 3% of the tag, 6%, at the most, maybe 10%. I'm busy today.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to care about or get people to care about a resource that you don't get to experience yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the nature of it.
Yeah. It's just, I don't, as long as this history that we just outlined from the Baldwin case going forward and the state of law that we have today, as long as it exists that way, if you are counting on non-resident applications as your hunting opportunity, it's just going to get more expensive and more discriminatory against you. That's just how it is.
Yeah, and again, like, selfishly, I enjoy it, but at the same time, like, it's I don't know, like, living in Montana, you definitely, on average, accept a lower salary. You live in a worse climate often than other places, and there's downsides and sacrifices, right, to experience the hunting that we do. So I guess in a perfect world, if I could decide, I'd probably be a little friendlier to non-residents, and I would be more than happy to pay more than our very cheap licenses and tags. But at the same time, I wouldn't. It's hard to say, like, oh yeah, let's just be on equal footing, because then that means that I probably wouldn't. I'd only get a hunt every 5 years or 10
like
years
Arizona
or whatever.
In 2005. Today, when all the sheep tags come out, if 50% of the applicants were non-residents, they'd probably get 50% of Montana sheep tags instead of 10%.
Yeah.
But, there's other parts that go into that. You go to the legislature on policy, on funding, on all kinds of stuff. Who are the people up there taking days off work, advocating, even when the legislature's not in session? Throughout the year, it's residents.
Yeah.
You and I went and did we've done multiple fence pulls. Most of the time, the majority of people there are residents. Not always. We get
some of that's a matter of just distance, convenience.
Exactly.
But yes.
But my point is, the residents are doing a lot of dirt under the fingernails, boots on the ground conservation work. They're doing a lot of advocacy work. And under a constitutional representative republic made up of 50 states, the 10th Amendment says the states have rights that they've had since time began, unless they've granted them to the federal government. And if we love having this representative republic under this Constitution, some of the things that maybe we don't like about it, or some may not like about it, is the fact that the states never gave up their interest in wildlife. And therefore, most of that, under current law, goes back to them, and they can be the trustees for the benefit of their citizens.
Yeah. So with that 2006 case, do you think that will be challenged at some point, or do you think there's a door open for that to be challenged at some point?
I don't know that the door is open for that to be challenged, but if you go back and look at those 16 Western senators who supported that bill, and the other, whatever it would be, the 84 senators just kind of like, oh yeah, sure, whatever.
Well, it probably didn't affect them as much. I mean, being in a Midwestern or Eastern state, it's like there's not I mean, I guess nowadays, though, there is more non-resident demand. It seems like there's more traveling hunters regardless of state. But compared to Western states, it's probably not quite the same.
Most attorneys I talk to say it's a waste of time to challenge it in court.
Gotcha.
Where you could change it is if you could convince the United States Congress and whoever the executive is at that time that this is a high enough priority over all the other things they fight and argue about, that we could get 60 senators to get it past debate to an actual floor vote, and then 51 of them voted in favor of it. And you had 218 Congress people, the House of Representatives, and it went to the president and they signed it. Yeah, then. But you look at what those hurdles are in today's world.
Yeah, it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But.
Yeah, and, are you going to get the guys from North Dakota on board with that? Because no one can apply for moose in North Dakota, but they all want to come here, hunting elk.
Yeah.
South Dakota, we can't apply for elk. Are you going to get South Dakota senator in on this? Because their residents are going to be like, no, we want our elk hunting. But they want to go to Wyoming and hunt elk. And so you'd have a lot of, I just think it would be really, really hard to get that to happen again.
Gotcha.
And when it passed in 2005, there were people on both sides of the aisle from a lot of states who are like, no, let's not disrupt the cart here. Let's let the states continue to do what they want to do, and let's make this law such that some of these clauses that, U.S. outfitters prevailed on in Arizona no longer are going to make the states vulnerable.
Yeah.
But
I was just going to say, it's just really interesting to know that history, because I didn't know a lot of it, like why it was that way, I guess.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of interesting to learn about this history of
and
how these price discrepancies started.
Yeah, and other people, the instant response, most people say, well, it's federal land. Okay, you're trying to make the equation that because some wildlife is on federal land and you're a quasi-owner by the virtue of a U.S. citizen, somehow land ownership equates to hunting opportunity. Well, it's never been that way. Because in a state like Montana that's 2/3 private, following that next rationale is 2/3 of our hunting opportunity would have to go through those landowners.
Yeah.
In a state like Texas, or let's say Missouri, where it's, 80% private land or more, do you want 80% of your deer take? You have to go to that private landowner to get your deer hunting opportunity? So it's convenient to use some of these real quick, well, it's federal land, I shouldn't be able to discriminate. Well, I get the feeling about that, but we live in a country of law governed by a constitution. And the courts interpret what all that means, and that's where we're at.
Yeah. Back to the Oklahoma case it was the Oklahoma bill that passed that is allowing, or the state game commission to charge non-residents fees to hunt public land.
Right.
Do you think that is going to open the door in other states? Do you think other states are going to follow suit?
Yes. I think every time one state does something, you see other states copy it. What happened? Wyoming raised their prices crazy for non-residents 2 years ago. What did Utah do? I know some other Western states have inquired.
Right.
Where do you think this would fall? So it's kind of a copycat thing. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Kansas, Kansas, they had a law. They wanted to eliminate non-resident duck hunting for a certain period of time. Their governor vetoed it.
Gotcha.
But I don't think that's going away.
Yeah.
I think you have times and places where residents have very cherished traditions. And as access shrinks because of hunting clubs or development or whatever, the residents feel more and more pressure in smaller areas for their valued tradition. Like waterfowl hunting in Louisiana and Arkansas it's like church on Sunday.
Yeah.
And just like what elk hunting is out here. So as residents start feeling a crimp on that, they're like, well, if we could at least get rid of the non-resident pressure for this week or this weekend or this month, that'd at least help a little bit. And they don't vote, so yeah,
No, it makes sense. And like, I don't know, I go back and forth with, because there's restricting via just total numbers allowed, right?
Right.
So like your allocation of wildlife to non-residents, but then
Right.
also pricing people out is the other popular thing, because then,
Right.
yeah, you're raising more money for your state agency. And, it just kind of makes sense that if you want just supply and demand, I guess, which is sad, as like,
Yeah.
you'd like to see hunting available to more people, but
Right.
at the same time, living in the state that you live in, like pretty much every state, if you are a resident of that state, it's pretty easy to afford to hunt. So
Right.
it's like
Right.
you might you might not have the luxury of hunting your neighboring state, or it's going to cost a lot if you do, but at least you still can afford
Right.
to hunt in your home state.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's a few exceptions, but a lot of resident licenses are pretty dang reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, my dad's generation, I don't know if he ever hunted outside of the county, let alone out. I know he went to Saskatchewan duck hunting and goose hunting, but he never came out to Montana or Wyoming.
Right.
And if you knew someone who did that, man, that guy must own the gold mine if he can afford to go out to Montana elk hunting. And so I think we have changed. We're a more mobile society. We're sharing technology and information way faster. So it is way more common to have non-resident hunters and non-resident hunting interest compared to what it was in my dad's generation. This is a new phenomena. But I think as we get more mobile, as some states, if you think about a lot of non-resident hunters who can afford to travel probably live in a state where they make a pretty decent living.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of benefits that come with being able to make a much better living. And so they're going to want to keep coming and doing more and more of this. Well, the more of that happens, the more the residents are like, we already have a lot of resident population growth going on in Idaho and Montana and Colorado. We got to start, closing the gate a little bit here from some of this pressure. And that is a reality. I hope that we can navigate it so that we still have a vested non-resident interest, the self-guided hunter person. Because if it becomes nothing but very wealthy non-residents who can do this, it's going to result in a different mix of who that non-resident hunter is, where their advocacy is going to lie, where their political pressures are going to lie. And I would just caution all of us who are residents of Western states, we need to think about this as a bigger picture. Just hammering the non-resident, I don't think, for the long-term interest of hunting in my state of Montana, is the best thing.
Yeah, it makes you really think about it, just like in terms of, yeah, if you can't go out and enjoy the resource, why should you care about it? And so that's the less people that can come out and see public lands in Western states and hunt on them, recreate on them. It's just, I don't care about them. I can see the viewpoint. It's hard to fault them.
Right. And I don't think any of the non-residents are like, I should get a Montana elk tag every year.
No.
I don't know. None of them ever say that. They're all happy with some reasonable number, wherever that ends up, and price differentials. But we keep getting further and further down this path. Yeah. Sooner or later, we're going to be so far down this path, we're going to look back and say, was this, should we have taken it this far?
Yeah.
Comments, flaming, feedback, cuss words down below.
Yeah, for sure. Put them in the comments. I'm curious what people think on this.
It's
pretty interesting. I mean, I like learning about this stuff, kind of the history of why we ended up where we are, and you learn a lot from history and from just seeing these court cases and everything. So, I don't know. It's an interesting one for sure. I'm curious to see how it's going to change with that Oklahoma bill going through. If, like you said, if other states start following suit, I'm sure they will to some extent.
Yeah.
Which it is what it is, I guess. And
it's their right to do it.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it all.
Yeah. I just feel blessed that, how fortunate that we live in the same town that this amazing wildlife attorney, Jim Getz, practiced. And he was kind enough to let me hire him for a few things. And like you said, the whole history of it's fascinating to me, but it also helps me understand where we're at. And our audience is asking us, hey, filter a bunch of this. We're not all going to go hire the Getzlaw firm. So tell us and give us. So hopefully they got some of that through this history here.
Yeah, thanks for telling me about it. And like you said, leave the comments down below.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check my my Montana draw results and see if I got a sheep tag.
Yeah, I already checked. I didn't get anything. It's sad.
Oh.
I got a sheep tag 2 years ago though, so I can't complain.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you.